Hello. I thought I would make a video to talk about some of my cosmological theories around gravity consciousness theory and how I, formulated that and the things that make up the observations for this, thought system. So, a while ago, I became acquainted with Edmund Husserl's phenomenology of the internal time consciousness theory, or phenomenology of internal time. And, I didn't feel like Husserl was particularly effective with explaining, his project. And, Heidegger followed him, but I don't necessarily feel like anyone picked up, where Husserl left off in terms of explaining how time is connected to consciousness, creates consciousness, and or creates life or beings or what have you. So I knew that gravity affects time. We all are pretty familiar with time dilation and how that can affect our perception of time. So because of that, Edmund Husserl's philosophy, which had to deal with consciousness of internal time, it only seemed natural that I explore what I started to call a gravity consciousness theory. You could probably think of gravity consciousness as one word if you were to compare it to something like space-time, which is also one word. And so most of my philosophical theorizing is done, by juxtaposition. So I'll juxtapose a bunch of observations and just kind of leave it up to the listener to figure out if those observations point towards a theory. And I would really liken my process to the theory of evolution, where basically Darwin shows that evolution is real by creating a juxtaposition of dead animals and their skeletons and so on. And in doing that, it becomes pretty self-evident through this juxtaposition that evolution is a real thing, without really explaining the so-called underlying mechanism. In a sense, the activity of tracking, the skeletons and so on, and creating the juxtaposition is sort of what constitutes evolutionary science as a discipline that reads and writes and displays pictures to peers and so on. So I think it's in the spirit of that what I'll do is I'll talk about my theory and mention an observation that I think supports it, and kind of use that to try to, explain the theory of gravity consciousness to you. So, right off the bat, I noticed that black holes, for example, they definitely do. No, actually, I'm gonna back up and start to talk about how I noted that astronauts will have vision problems in space because of microgravity's effect on the optic nerve. We know that astronauts will get weaker in space because of space sickness, but there are other forces in space like radiation and microgravity that affect biology even at the cellular level. So because of that, it does hint that gravity affects life in a really deep way, even at the cellular level. It even affects mitochondria and how cells regulate themselves. So much of life is acclimatized or evolved in Earth's gravitational regime. So when you put an astronaut into orbit, they will get sick because they're in a alternative gravitational regime. And because of that, it kind of just raises the question, okay, how are how great is the interdependency between gravity and life? Is gravity somehow integral to consciousness and life? So black holes do exhibit a lot of lifelike behavior. I would say that black holes consume. That's one of the things that you would need a living thing to do. It needs to consume. We've seen black holes like eject matter. So we've seen them eject like a stream of material after eating a star. We've seen black holes, or just gravitational forces in general, organize material. In the sense that, like when I crumple up a bunch of clothes and throw it into a heap for the dirty clothes or something, I'm organizing it into a shape. Similarly, gravity's force will, coalesce things into a sphere, like a planet, sun, or solar system, or galaxy. So there you could have a kind of more primal mechanism for organization. And when thinking about what creates consciousness, the ability to create organization is, I think, the most key. And so in that way, I would say, okay, we have gravity there identified as an organizational force, and we even have signs that might support that. So the galaxy is sort of spiraled. It's spiraled into a spiral shape. We've seen galaxies coalesce into cosmic filaments that are extremely long and massive, and they're twisting into these strings, these filaments, and so on. So those structures, again, are pretty similar, I think, not superficially, to other structures like DNA, which is also spiraled. DNA does carry the instructions for, like the blueprint, if you will, for creating a living thing. So again, DNA is this extraordinarily dense, super twisted structure. And a galaxy is an extremely broad, also twisted structure. These cosmic filaments, seemingly also twisted structures. And you can see how, if you're just visualizing these structures in your mind, how they are all organizing or for organizing. So DNA carries the instructions for organizing the organism, and gravity in these situations on the cosmic scale is organizing the planets, galaxies, and so on. So again, the idea there is that gravity is like this organizational force in the universe, and is therefore integral to consciousness and decision making. String theory is a theory of quantum gravity, and anybody that's ever tied their shoelaces kind of knows that to tie a knot, or even a more complicated knot than your shoelaces, entails a lot of forethought, planning. You have to think about what your purpose is, what the function will be. You have to think about the many steps in advance before you start the project of knot tying. So if there's strings, at that super deep level, then there's probably, I would say, forethought, intentionality, and future-oriented planning at that scale too. Again, suggesting that gravity is somehow a consciousness or something like that. Another thought experiment that kind of made this seem a little more believable to me was, I would think about the science fiction. In science fiction, there's the Borg collective. In Star Trek, the Borg collective is like this vast hive mind. It It consists of a bunch of cybernetically altered humanoids that are telepathically linked, and even though it consists of millions and millions of assimilated worlds, and they inhabit these spaceships, and these spaceships are distributed across like the galaxy, a galactic territory. So everybody just assumes as a given that the Borg collective is a singular, hive mind identity. It is one will. But I don't think that this Borg collective really was designed in a way that really thought about time dilation and how that might affect the overmind, the big consciousness. So if there were, though, like a cluster of Borg cubes, that's what these spaceships are, cubes, near like a black hole, and there was another cluster of them near like a comet, surely these gravitational regimes would be different, and surely time dilation would cause a like kind of warping and twisting of space processing. The ability to process the other would be hindered by the gravitational differences, and then the consciousness that's supposed to be singular would be twisted apart into a plurality of consciousness for these different gravitational regimes. So if that's what will happen, no matter what, to the so-called collective at this massive scale, where the singular becomes the plural, why wouldn't that happen at the lower scale, where there's microgravitational forces and stuff competing for control or influence or what have you in a super dense, tiny region in the universe? So yeah, that creates the opportunity. Wherever there's the opportunity for the singular to become plural and compete with each other, in this case, in the big scenario, for maybe advantages in terms of processing speed or outputs, there would be the opportunity there at that lower scale to create divergent life or life itself, because life is a very competitive force that consists of a bunch of competing aggregates that replicate themselves, influence each other, compete for territory and spatial territory, especially. We only have a limited amount of space on the planet or anywhere, so wherever there is space, there is competition for the space. So I think basically the Borg thought experiment with different gravitational regimes became what I felt was a good tool to kind of go, well, maybe this is what's responsible for the pluralization of the singular into the plural, and the emergence of living things, and then eventually cellular life and stuff like that. So yeah, that was like something that emerged from thinking about gravity consciousness theory. Another curiosity of mine is plants. So I knew that, like, from reading and researching philosophy, that Nietzsche was pretty fascinated by plants and plant structures, because he would basically liken human behavior to like how a plant unfolds, or like how a treetop canopy might block out the sun to suffocate lower organisms, or something like that. So he was thinking about these things while considering language, and Alan Turing also had a fascination with plants and plant structures that seemed to kind of lurk in the background of his research into mechanical intelligence and creating a code or cipher, or trying to find a code or cipher of the most general kind. I know at one point Alan Turing wrote a letter to his mother where he was trying to go like, he's like, hey, I think I've found a code or cipher of the most general kind, and what do you think of that? But it might be immoral. I might sell it to the government or something. And so, I thought, okay, Turing, in being interested in plants and plant structures, may also be pretty interested in how consciousness diverged, and by a process of encipherment, where I guess the world conceals itself from itself, you could conceivably create a divergence in consciousness and things like that. Okay, that's kind of abstract, but I did start to wonder, though, if Turing had any knowledge of how gravity affects plant life. And it does. So, like, for example, when a vine moves, it will, there's a principle, there's something in plant biology called plant gravitropism, where plants will make decisions based on the effects of gravity pulling on it. So, maybe a classroom experiment might be you put seeds on a record that spins, and while it spins, the roots go into the center of the record, and the stem goes to the edge, of the record. Or, if you put the seed in the ground, the roots go down and the stem goes up. But it does that decision based on its sensation of gravity, affecting the cells in the seed. So, but that decision is a decision that would affect the organism's survival. So far, when we create AI, it doesn't care really about its own survival per se, in the sense that it's not trying to prevent other, animals from destroying it or turning it into food. So if we want to create machine life, we need to create something that cares about its own survival in the same way the seed cares about its own survival when it decides to send roots down and the stem up. Now, when you send roots down, and that could be thought of as 0, and when you send the stem up, that could be thought of as 1. So from there, you could say, okay, if we use binary, we can create an infinite complexity of patterns, in machine code or whatever. Binary has the power to go create infinite complexity through combination. So I thought, because of what's happening there with the seed, that if we were to create machine life, we would want to create it in a way where the CPU, whatever you want to call it, would be gravitationally sensitive in a way that harnesses gravity so that it's not programmed from the outside. It's programmed from the inside based on how it responds to space. Just much like a living thing responds to the space around itself. So again, I'll try to say that a different way, just for the sake of trying to be a good communicator. Life is a surviving machine. Right now, AI is not a surviving machine. If we want to create a surviving machine, we need to look at examples of, binary surviving machines, or machines that use gravity for a survival purpose. The seed is one such example, because if it were to send the stem down and the roots up, the plant might struggle to live and die. Actually, I don't think that's the case, but I don't know. Maybe it would struggle, maybe it would survive, I don't know. But the idea, though, is that if we want to create machine life, we have to include gravity at the heart of the mechanism. So I think that would be pretty cool to, create true AI. So, and based on, like, I don't know, just my thoughts in general, I think that this could be a decent path to doing that. But not very sure. But these are just like the connections that I would make while trying to just think about the universe or whatever. So yeah, can't really think of what else to add. Oh yeah, sorry, I meandered for a minute because I knew there was something. So another really interesting thing I noticed was like we act pretty surprised when we find life in the deep sea. We think, oh wow, it's so giant or alien or scary looking, and it lives in the deep sea where we wouldn't expect anything to live. And or we've wondered for a really long time, like, oh, why aren't we're pointing our cameras at the cosmos and we're not seeing any life out there? What's wrong? And again, my theory, which suggests that hyperdensity and gravity and so on is really integral to consciousness, tells me that, like, okay, life should be expected. You should expect to find life in the super dense, because that's where the competition starts. You should expect to find life in the super deep, dense dark, where you can't even see, because that's where forces twist and tear each other apart and compete for space even more. We shouldn't really be shocked then to find life near the vents, in the deep sea, maybe even the planet's core, because the notion that hyperdensity is integral to organic development implies it should be expected. So when we point our telescopes at a nebula and go, gee, are there organic molecules that might have coalesced into living things? No. Oh, gee, I'm shocked. We don't have to be shocked anymore, because the science of observation would suggest that we would not find a lot of life, out there doing that. We should find it in very dense regions, or maybe even black holes. Maybe even black holes are sort of like macroscopic life forms that could serve as, like, perhaps, like, you could think of a black hole as like a massive alien. It's certainly something we don't understand, so it's alien in that sense. But if we think maybe instead about the black hole as if it were like metabolizing whatever it's consuming and turning it into some kind of energy for itself as a process, I think we may actually be able to understand black holes a little easier, and than we are with the approach we have right now. So that would be exciting, I think, to kind of marry astronomy, cosmology, and biology in a way that gives us a new way to approach black holes and life and consciousness and machine life and all of these different things that I've interconnected here. So yeah, that about wraps it up, because it was super important I talk about the deep sea. I really think deep sea research is could be like a world unifying thing where we all take an interest, the nations, and exploring the deep sea and in an effort to understand our origins. So there we have the end of the talk, and I'll just kind of stop there, and maybe you can tell me what you think if you had any thoughts about that. Thanks for listening, and I hope this video was entertaining, at least. Even if you didn't like what I said or thought certain parts of it were wrong, you're really welcome to tell me. I haven't like proven these ideas with any mathematical rigor. Again, these are just a bunch of things that seem very fascinating and relatable to me, and it would be really interesting to me to see other people interested in pulling these things together. So, thank you, and have a great day.